Kia ora and welcome to the Niggly Niche Cast. I am the Diggity Doodah Doc and Wildcard. Before I introduce you, let me just be known that I'm also known around the village as Mr. Slippers. So you can refer to me as Diggity Doodah Doc, you can refer to me as Mr. Slippers, or you can just refer to me as the Grape. Wildcard, how's it going?
Oh, not too bad. Is there an origin story behind Mr. Slippers?
There was funnily enough, I got put onto a mixtape from DJ Louis Slippers out of England, some little underground English raps, and ever since then the name Slippers has just resonated with myself. I don't particularly wear slippers. I'm more of a just wear socks, and then when you leave the house you wear shoes, so I don't really see the point in slippers, but I do like the word slippers.
Funny you should say that, because I bought a pair of slippers the other day when I happened to be near a Kmart, and I popped in looking for a phone charger, which inexplicably they didn't have at Kmart. It was, I don't know, a bit of a strange one. They don't seem to have phone chargers there. Needed a new one because my as they do, all these things are made to wear out. It's deliberate obsolescence. Deliberate obsolescence. You know, they make these things to break eventually, so that you buy replacements. So I did. I couldn't find one there, but I ended up buying a pair of slippers for like $5. And tell you what, clever old purchase. I'm quite proud of that one. The point of them specifically, it was a little bit of an impulse buy, but I find the point of them through my extended use over the last few days is that they're a lot easier to slide on than socks. Cold morning, you don't want to sit around there fumbling through the dresser trying to find a couple, two matching socks. Sometimes that's not a priority. If it's cold enough, you do what you have to do. But I found the slippers to be very, very much of an improvement in my lifestyle. Albeit I don't wear them outside.
I'm more of a wear socks all the time in winter kind of guy.
You just sleep with the socks on sort of thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense.
Why would you take them off? I don't really understand that. But I can say that Kmart, the warehouse, very fine fashion establishments. Any of your basic fashion needs, just go to Kmart and the warehouse and you're sorted. If you're buying a brand, you're losing. When you can just get the same jumper, no brand, for half the price at Kmart or the warehouse. Not sponsored, so maybe they should sponsor us and they should help us out. Wildcard, we are here to discuss Wellington Phoenix. As always, you can support the Niche Cage on Patreon until we get a couple of those sponsorships coming in from Kmart and the warehouse. Jump on Patreon to support the Niche Cage and the Niche Cast. The Wellington Phoenix season is all over after losing to the Melbourne Victory in their little playoffs. Whatever you want to call it. They're all knockout games at this stage, and they have also bid ka kite to their coach, Mark Rudan. So we'll get on to the coaching stuff later on. I just want to get your vibe specifically about that one-off knockout footy game, and was there something in that game against the Melbourne Victory and losing to the Melbourne Victory that you saw that could act as like a marker of what held the Phoenix back overall this season? Did they kind of play to their potential, but there are a few things missing that could have taken them further, as we've seen throughout the season, in your eyes, as Aotearoa's leading Wellington Phoenix correspondent?
You flattered me. I was going to say Doc, but was it Mr. Slippers? Lord Slippers? Senor Slippers?
to you, it's just slippers. We'll just go with
okay.
slippers.
You flatter me, slippers. That's the big question, eh? That's the one I've been trying to figure out because I've written 2 post, I guess they're now post-season articles about the Wellington Phoenix. The first one just recapping the game that was. The second one looking at the managerial change. And the third one, which maybe it'll be out by the time this podcast is up, or maybe it won't, I don't know. It'd be fairly soon after. Maybe this podcast can help me sort through my feelings on this one, because I'm struggling to come up with an answer to the question that I have in my head, which I was wondering about even before this victory game. Is this a successful season for the Wellington Phoenix? And compared to where they were last season, like absolutely they're making big strides. They I think they were 9th last season. Either way, they were nowhere near the playoffs. To come 6th and get into the playoffs this time, certainly an improvement. But at the same time, I just got that niggling feeling, that they let this one slip because they should have been 4th. They had a couple bad results down the stretch, just not quite at the standard. Because it's one thing to lose in a game like this one against the Melbourne Victory, because what we saw there was just a team getting outclassed by a better side, a team that has more money to spend, a team that has better standout players. And I remember writing in my preview that it could very well end up being a battle between Ola Toivonen and Roy Krishna as to who will be the most effective. Both have already scored goals against the other team this season, and Roy Krishna was the best on the park for the Phoenix, but Ola Toivonen was the best on the park, full stop. So I don't think it was quite as simple as that in the end, the matchup between the two, because what you saw instead was Melbourne Victory played a smart tactical game. They knew that if you clog up the defense against the Phoenix, just get your midfield a little deeper, don't play a high line or anything. You just cut off the room that guys like Krishna and David Williams have to run into, and you force the Phoenix to create from in front of you, and that's just, they've shown time and time again this season they're not really up to that. That's not quite what they're, that's now and then they'll score a nice goal, someone will smash one in from outside the box, or they'll get a good cross in, but they've struggled overall to turn good possession into goals in those kind of situations. And then as the game goes on, you just pick them off on the counter-attack. Phoenix got a slow backline. Nothing changed against the Victory. Toivonen's not the quickest guy in the world, but he found plenty of space to work into. Barbarouses, old mate Costa, he is one of the quicker ones in the A-League, and he had a few moments himself, scored a goal. So yeah, that sort of just is what it is, that game. We saw the Phoenix don't have enough depth in their squad. There's a lot of stuff where they're still building towards. There are a couple players short of competing with the best teams, and they didn't have a lot of playoff experience compared to the Melbourne Victory, who did this whole thing last year with most of the squad and won the title, defending champs. So they know how to win these games. The Phoenix didn't. Whatever, that's just the state of the two teams. But the Phoenix shouldn't have been playing away to the Melbourne Victory in this game. They should have been home to Adelaide or Melbourne City, and maybe they would have lost those games too, because those are fairly even teams, and Adelaide have shown that they were a little bit of a bogey team for the Phoenix during the regular season. So maybe they would have been a bit too much even at home. I would have backed the Phoenix against Melbourne City in a home game had it come to that, but even still, just to not even have that opportunity, which was what would have put them in the best position to win, would be home field advantage in that playoff game. They let it slip with a couple bad results, so I'm not really sure how to say whether or not it's a successful season. I'm kind of interested what you reckon from a step back or two. Yes, they improved a lot from last year, but also wasted opportunities towards the end meant that the season wasn't all that it could have been. So, I'm conflicted on this.
Well, as long as the general theme of improvement is present, and given where the Wellington Phoenix have come from, it's hard not to just be satisfied with what happened. I think what might be twisting this situation a little bit is the fact that Mark Rudan, who got them to an improved season, there was questions around his future for much of the season, and then he parted ways after 1 year. So I think there might be a vibe of we didn't make the most of that 1 year with Mark Rudan, which is kind of convoluted because for much of the season. No one knew if he was staying or going or blah, blah, blah. So it was a really complicated situation. A different perspective is perhaps saying, well, given how crazy a season, maybe a 12-month period for the Wellington Phoenix it has been, it's a pretty good result. Like, they've set themselves up in the middle tier of the A-League, and sure that, like, given the uncertainty, given the kerfuffle of where they were coming from, pieces have been put in place for more growth and more success and a sustainable kind of future, depending on what happens with the A-League license. So, like, once you get into the weeds and you start picking away at their style of play and different players and coaching and the future of the coach and those sorts of things, I'm sure it's easy to find issues, but from a bigger picture, I think it's a fairly solid position which they can move forward from. And yeah, I just think the coaching situation kind of tinged the season in the sense that you're looking at a case of what might have been as opposed to a stepping stone, if you catch my drift.
Yeah, that's a great point on Mark Rudan, because I think that is the factor that probably has made this as slightly confusing as it is, because were he staying and continuing to build upon what he had done this season, then you just look at it and say, yeah, great first campaign. We've made big strides and we're well positioned to build on this next year. We know exactly how we're playing. We know exactly which areas of the squad need work. You know, what areas tactically do we need to tweak a little bit and improve upon. And when you see like big rebuilds, and the Phoenix needed a rebuild almost from top to bottom. Like, Rudan came in and he had hardly any players left over from the squad before. Guys like Alex Rufer were trailing for their place again, and Alex Rufer ended up having a brilliant season, and he's now poised to be an important player again next year. So these are things that we didn't have in place before. The confidence around the club, the belief that they can go and get results, that sort of defiant attitude that allowed those things to come through. All pure Mark Rudan, though, is the only problem, and we'll talk about his replacement, Mr. Talai, soon enough. But the fact that Rudan was a one-and-done manager, I think has kind of given the feeling, and I don't think it's an unfair position either to have, that it was a little bit all in this season. Because you're going to have to change some things with a new manager, as no matter how smooth you try to make that transitional process, things will change. A new manager's going to have a different point of view on some things. Tactically, it'll be a different story, you know. So there is a little bit of starting again anytime you get a new manager, anytime you get new players as well, because there is the threat of a few important players from this season leaving, and maybe that's an opportunity to get better ones in. You know, no one who's going to leave is going to be irreplaceable as long as Roy Krishna resigns, and I'm mostly confident that he will at this point. I think he had a little Facebook post the other day is thanking the fans at the end of the season, which certainly sounded like he wanted to come back. So it's really just a matter of getting the right, dollar signs and on the contract offer there. And honestly, if the Phoenix can't sort that one out, then I think they've buggered up badly, because I reckon he's there to re-sign if you can meet his asking price. So do it. Most important player they've got by a large margin. Yeah, it is that thing though, with Mark Rudan going. It's sort of, you don't get that future thing to like console you and say that this is where we're heading towards. It was a little bit of all the eggs in this one basket right now. Let's make the most of the single season that we have with Rudan, and didn't do that, to be honest. Like, didn't make the most of it. But of course, you know, if the next manager is inheriting the club in a much better state than the last one got it in. So a net gain, I suppose.
We will get into some specifics now of the Wellington Phoenix and how they've played this season, a couple of highlights, whatever. Just want to roll through these nice and quickly. So you've got two choices, so you've got an A and a B of your favourite Wellington Phoenix Player of the Year season?
Favourite? Well, I don't suppose anyone can go past Roy Krishna running a Golden Boot winning campaign.
But is he your favourite? It's not about
the
masses.
I think he's got to be my favourite. He's definitely the player I enjoy watching most in that team, because he's just the dude with the X factor. And how could you not enjoy that? How could you not enjoy a guy who can, like, just the speed at which he does things as well is great. He's improved so much over the last probably 3 or 4 seasons. It's quite a telling thing that when he first started for the Phoenix, he was an injury replacement for Paul Eiffel, and this many years later, he has become the Phoenix's new version of Paul Eiffel in his own way. So quite a talismanic figure there, Roy Krishna. My next favourite would be a little. You got a couple options here. I suppose I've got to be ruthless and pick one. So I'm not sure if I want to go Libby Kikache or Alex Rufer. I think I'm going to go with Alex Rufer, because from where he was 12 months ago, I thought he would maybe cash in on the family name and try get a deal in 2nd Division Switzerland or 3rd Division Germany or something like that. I thought he was just at a point where, having not played anywhere near as much football as he would have liked over the last couple of seasons, I thought he would just follow some of those other guys, James McGarry, Logan Rogerson, guys like that, and just go try the pro circuit overseas. And he didn't do that. He stayed. He trialed. He won his next contract. He has since earned another one on top of that. I think only for a year, maybe 2. I'm not sure. I think 1 year for Rufer. And what he did in between was pretty fantastic, to go from a guy who, I think the first time I saw him play was in that under-20 setup a few years ago, and he was like a hold-up striker type. Probably similar to Andre De Jong, what he does for Eastern Suburbs these days, and he wasn't really up for it in that position, and he moved back to more of an attacking midfielder as he was progressing through the Phoenix ranks, and then now you've got him where he's just found his home as a defensive midfielder. Wouldn't have thought a guy like that would be as physical and as almost like roughhouse as he can be. Dude gets a yellow card every second game. In fact, I think he might even be, I'm not sure if there are carryover suspensions, but if there are, he'll be missing the first game of next season, because I think he got 11 yellow cards throughout this one, and that's, fair credit. That takes some work to get that many yellow cards. I've been impressed by just him turning in from this creative midfielder who couldn't quite get to the standards that people were hoping for him, to turn into this defensive midfield enforcer. I think has been an outstanding what's the word? An outstanding just. I don't even want to say that he's rebuilt his career or anything like that. I think this has just been the breakthrough. After all these years, this is the breakthrough, and this is his position now. And bloody hell, man, he stepped it up big time.
Who is your pick for the undercover brother, the guy that people might not have noticed and celebrated, but was crucial in what the Phoenix were doing, and just consistently caught your eye as someone who, well, just someone, undercover player. I'll save that second bit for the next one.
I reckon there is a pretty solid answer here for this one. He was so undercover that he wasn't even playing in the elimination final. That's Louis Fenton. And the funny thing about him is, of all the people that needed that rebuild, that sort of career reset that Mark Rudan came in and helped so many of these players with, Louis Fenton was number 1 on that list. He had struggled with injuries. He had played a lot of games, but he had never quite been at the level he wanted to be at. He'd been in and out of he'd just spent a year playing for Team Wellington, where even then he wasn't getting as many games as he would have liked. Went and played, I think, for Melbourne Knights or something like that in the Victorian League, and did all right there. Came back they had promised him a contract after a year off just to play some football and get his fitness back up. He started the season. He was the one guy in the 11 who took the longest to get settled and to step his game up to that level that the rest of them began to get towards after a month or two of the campaign. he took a little while to get there, but once he got there, he quickly turned into quite an important player, just a guy who can get up the... Defensively, okay, he's a little up and down. All of our options at right back have been. But he's very good. He's just getting forward, swinging the ball into the box kind of thing, trying to get in behind the defence once or twice. He scored a couple goals, and we saw in the elimination final just how difficult it was to replace him once he was out, and that actually goes back probably a month before that. David Williams played a couple games at right wing back, couldn't do it. Not only could he not do it at right wing back, but it was just a silly move to have him there when you're taking away one of the two proven goal scorers in the squad. So naturally, he ended up back at striker for the victory game. Justin Gully played one game there and didn't play again. I think he had injuries, so it wasn't like strictly that he was struggling. He had an up and down game. Some of his distribution was great. Some of his defensive stuff, he just was a little off the pace, as you'd expect for a guy who was playing his first game of the season at a time when everyone else is trying to peak. So, understandable. Callan Elliott, once or twice, young guy, ordinarily a winger, asked to play as a right wing back, so it was going to be tricky for him, but he did some nice things coming off the bench a few times. So they tried a lot of options there. It ended up being Ryan Lowry in the elimination final, and he struggled. A little unfair to pick on him for that, because he is a centre-back having to play right wing-back, which is a position where you don't just need to be defensively good, you actually need to provide that width going up the flanks and attack, and he just cut back and passed every time he had an option, so that one didn't work. But I think more than anything, rather than blaming Ryan Lowry, I think that's just evidence of how Louis Fenton turned himself from a guy who was barely wanted or almost forgotten a year ago to quite a crucial player in the end. So, undercover brother, Louis Ferenc Pushkas Fenton.
And finally, which of the Wellington Phoenix players do you see as having the most impactful upside moving forward over as we move into this new era? After 1 year, a new era begins of Mr. Ufuk Talai.
Upside, probably Sarpreet Singh, just because he's a dude who is a young player who you naturally would expect to keep on improving, and also a guy who's been thrust into being a rather important creative force for the Phoenix. When he came off, he was dropped from the starting lineup to accommodate Max Burgess, and understandable, because Burgess just had a great last 2 months of the season. Got to the point where if it was a head-to-head between Burgess and Singh, Burgess had to play, and Williams playing up front meant that they couldn't pick both of them. So Singh dropped to the bench. First guy off the bench when they needed a goal, came on, provided one, set Roy Krishna up with a lovely little ball. Roy Krishna with a great finish. Just little classy moments like that Sarpreet Singh can offer that arguably no one else in the squad, as it was this last season, can really do to that same level. It's just that he's got to learn to do that more consistently, and that's an incredibly difficult thing to do. But if he does, then there's your big upside right there.
And talk us through the impact that do you know anything about Mr. Talai, Ufuk Talai? What do you know, and what do you see as like a key work on for the Wellington Phoenix now that Mr. Ufuk Talai is taken over as coach?
I don't know a whole lot about him, to be honest. I don't keep up with my Aussie assistant coach battler sort of lists nearly as much as I do with my Kiwi player lists, so I can't offer too much on the fella, but from my research over the last few days, I can tell you he's probably, I think the reason they've targeted him, there are two major factors that have set him apart from everyone else. One is that he is the closest thing to Mark Rudan they could get, short of getting Mark Rudan. And we know they wanted Mark Rudan. They didn't let him go. He reluctantly left himself. So club was all set to enjoy another season of Mark Rudan in their eyes and in their sort of perfect world goggles. So the best thing they could do, I guess, in their eyes, was to hire the person who was the closest thing to that. And there's a few reasons for that. His similar age, coming from a very similar standpoint in that he knows the A-League as a player, he knows the A-League as an assistant manager, he knows Australian football extremely well, and he is also, coming in. This is his first gig as an A-League head coach. This is something where he's got a lot to prove. He'll be a very driven, competitive guy. Because of that comes recommended by Mark Rudin as well, who he played with. He played with at Sydney FC back in the day. Played with, I think, in Japan, as the pair of them were import players for the same club there once, and they also, I believe, worked together at with the Australian under-20s. It was, I think, when Talai was coaching them, and I think Rudin might have been his assistant for a little bit. So they got a lot in common. They seem to be mates. I assume that means they've got similar mentalities and similar outlooks on the game of football, so that all makes sense. Like, I understand that you don't want to go for the big old swing and miss of another Dario Kalazic. You want to just keep things sturdy, trust in the formula that you know worked well enough this season, and that's what they've done. The other thing that sets Talay apart is that the Phoenix don't have the money to go out and just sign like an Ola Toivonen or whoever. They just can't compete with Melbourne Victory, Sydney FC, probably Melbourne City, like a couple of these other teams. They can't compete with them financially. They're never going to be able to pay the money like for some of the marquee players that these guys have been able to sign. Part of that, it's not just that as well, I guess. That's the top level. They're also the middling level of signing good Australian players. They can get them. They signed David Williams this season. He had a great season. He's probably going to go back to Australia now, and that's just kind of the fact of where the Phoenix are at. A good, solid Australian player on the fringes of like possibly pushing for a Socceroos jersey kind of thing. Those guys will absolutely want to play for the Wellington Phoenix if they're going to get good minutes to impress in the A-League, but they would always rather play for an Australian club because they're Australian guys. That's just the way it goes. However, the Phoenix do have a good shot at some New Zealand players, not the top fringe ones, because the top end guys are going to be pushing Europe and America, those kind of places. But some of those up-and-coming players, absolutely, like a Callan Elliott. We saw Ben Wayne coming out of their academy, looked decent in his debut start the other week. Gianni Stensness is another guy who's pushed through. Libby Kakache and Sarpreet Singh. They've quite a young team, and they've definitely got an open eye of, if we can't sign them at their peak, well, what if we sign them before their peak and bring them towards that? And they've got a very good academy, probably the best academy in the A-League, just in terms of like the numbers of players that graduate to play full-time. Other factors involved in that, part of it being the fact that they can't just go out and sign whoever they want, so they do kind of have to rely on sort of rubbing pennies together and bringing guys through the academy. It's just a useful way of doing things, and it's an efficient way of doing things. And Ufuk Talay has a lot of experience at coaching young players. He's worked with the Aussie under-17s, worked with the Australian Institute of Sport, worked with the Aussie under-20s. I think he took them to a World Cup a little while back. He knows how to get through to the players of that age. He knows how to get the best out of them and challenge them and those kind of things. So I think that is probably the thing that tips him ahead, and it's something, to be honest, that he has above Mark Rudin. Mark Rudin had some experience at these things. Talay has a lot of it, and I got to imagine that's a high priority for the Phoenix when they were looking for their next manager, just because of the state of the club, because of how important it is for them to be able to get good minutes out of academy players, and because of how good this fella happens to be with his track record of coaching these guys in this age group.
Beautiful. Absolutely delightful. Do you have any closing words on the Wellington Phoenix, or even just maybe more interesting, what I would find more interesting, is your view on how the Wellington Phoenix fit into New Zealand football at the moment? So after this season, how do you see their standing? Because there's been like a bit of a disconnect throughout our tenure covering the Wellington Phoenix and New Zealand football. We both see New Zealand football as being in a fairly strong position generally in terms of women's and men's football. How do you see the Wellington Phoenix fitting into that with regards to their academy setup, developing New Zealand players, and just aligning with the vibe of football in Aotearoa?
Well, I guess it's a more stable connection than they had in the past. Just having a season like they just had, where funny thing is, they went out of their way to get a stable Australian manager, and that stable Australian manager came in and really, at first there was a bit of a question. He didn't seem to rate the local premiership nearly as highly as he should have, because I think a lot of people fall in the trap there of looking at it and saying, well, the overall quality isn't great, so why would I sign anyone from there? But the reason the overall quality isn't as good as it could be, and I think it's a lot better than most people realise, is that with the premiership, the best players, the gap between the best players and the worst players is huge. But, those best players, you're not going to sign the entire Hawke's Bay United backline. You only need one or two guys from that level to step up, and obviously someone like a Callum McCowart probably has his sights set a little further ahead, but Callum Elliott made his name at that level, and he's settled in nicely to this squad. All those Phoenix reserve guys are playing at that level, so it's a bit dumb to talk that down anyway when your reserves are plugging away there. So, but yeah, Mark Rudan did sign one or two players out of that level. Justin Gully was another one. He did push guys through the academy. Gianni Stensness, Ben Wayne, Callum Elliott, once he got there, he had already played a season for Tasman before that. But you chuck in as well Sarpreet Singh, Libby Kakache, Alex Rufer, Louis Fenton. Probably wouldn't count Andy Durante at this point of his career, but a lot of good Kiwi players, specifically good young Kiwi players, getting pretty big minutes for this Phoenix team. So I think that has helped reconnect them a lot with fans, but also the general New Zealand football setup. So yeah, it's in a more stable place than it once was. Talk about which all whites they can target now. I always get hesitant when it comes to that thing, because why would Stefan Marinovic has been released by Bristol City? He was only on a short-term contract there, but he got a contract with an English Championship club. He can probably get another one with another one. He doesn't really, and he was on trial for a while with Rangers. I expect his sights are set a little higher than the Phoenix as well, and I don't see why they should chase someone like that and just drag him out of the Flying Kiwis pool. But there are a lot of players on the sort of one or two tiers down which the Phoenix could definitely target, and I think that would help them just with this sort of newfound reliance on some key local players. Wouldn't be the worst thing they could do, I'll say that. I'm not sure how else to answer that question, but that's something, Doc. Is that enough?
That'll do the trick.
Oh, good.
I do think there is that kind of tier below the top professional dogs, which I don't think it will happen anytime within the next kind of 18 months, but you could rise to a certain level and then start targeting those guys and just go, snowball effect, and it could get pretty interesting. But that's just, an idiot like myself talking.
Well, there's guys on a level with Sam Brotherton, Maya Bevan, some of those guys playing lower leagues in Scandinavia who aren't in a setup where they're just building. Well, I mean, someone like Nico Boxall is probably at the level where that's the best sort of quality of a player that this Phoenix could be targeting, but he's pushing for promotion to the top division in Denmark. So, and someone like Marco Rojas is going to be getting more money in Denmark playing in that top division than he could get playing for the Phoenix. And it's a tricky one, because you do want to see great New Zealand players playing for the Phoenix, but I think you don't need to limit the scope there. They're doing a very good job at the moment of bringing through the next group of those players and pushing them on. Because someone like Liberato Kakache, in 5 years' time, why couldn't he go play in a lower half of the Serie A kind of thing in Italy kind of club? Why not? If he keeps improving the way he has already, he's way ahead of the curve as it is. He's 18, 19 years old, played probably 30, 40 A-League games already. So, sky's the limit there. Why not be that club that brings these guys through, gets great service out of them, and then pushes them on to bigger and better things in Europe?
Got you loud and clear there, Wildcard. Appreciate your insight and information on the Wellington Phoenix, and we will wrap it up there. We'll be back in the coming days to talk rugby league. preview the next round of NRL footy. Otherwise, stay tuned. You can catch 1, 2, 3-part series from the wildcard writing about the Wellington Phoenix. Otherwise, ka kite. Ciao for now. Later, boat.